August 1921. You look pleased. Cora Crawley looked up from her book in the library as Robert walked in, holding letter. I am. He told his wife, then looked to her, smiling. I am. Professor Rutherford has written to me, sending me a copy of the academic paper of Dr. James Chadwick, CO, authored by Miss Ashby. How wonderful. Lady Crawley replied. Does he say anything else? Is she well? He doesn't. Lord Grantham conceded. He stepped over to his wife and handed her the paper. It is dedicated to us, to Lord Grantham of Downton Abbey and every person within it. Oh Robert, I am so glad you decided to be her sponsor. Cora Crawley enthused. After all her time here, she's found her place in the world. And, Robert Crawley told his wife, he is considering offering her place in his research team when he returns to Cambridge. She has come on. Cora handed the paper back to her husband. What is it about? She asked. Robert opened the paper, and scanned the first page, frowning a little, then flipped to the next. It is so prestigious, she added. Prestige enough, Robert told her, but I cannot really make head nor tail of what it all means. Cora got to her feet and crossed to her husband. It means a world-renowned professor, a Nobel Prize winner no less, had written to you with cutting-edge research that the young woman you sponsor has played a part in. Robert Crawley looked away from the paper and across to Cora. It raises our family and our home high, he replied, shaking his head and smiling. Do you remember when she came here? Could not be much older than about 3 or 4. Would not let Ernest's hand go, until Mrs. Hughes took her for a walk in the gardens, and even then she wasn't happy until she got to the water fountain. Then Mr. Ashby could not get her away. She was looking at the sunlight, kept putting her hand into it, trying to catch its beams. Well, it sounds as if she's catching something with this Mr. Chadwick, Cora told him. Not just her brother's work, this is something of her own. Dr. Chadwick, Robert Crawley told his wife, Mama has it in mind that she will write to Mrs. Jameson. She wants me to invite them to visit. She knew Mrs. Jameson when she was out in the season, back in the 60s. Me, Lucina's grandmother. He glanced at the letter again. Remarkable, he added. Milo has done in 1 year what other students do in 3. So she can graduate this year. I am so pleased, Cora Crawley told her husband, paced back to the chair and picked back up her book. Finding her page, she looked back up, following Lord Grantham as he crossed to his desk. Does that mean we can get rid of the masts now? She asked. One has gone already, Robert Crawley told her. Cora nodded. If you can speak to her about the other one when she is next here. After her success with her work, there should be no reason to keep them after this. I know poor Mr. Travis had kittens every time she climbed up there. Robert Crawley nodded. They would be going to Donegal soon, so he could invite her to visit, congratulate her, mention the church, ensure that Momo understood the significance of her achievement. But then, she did, at some level, to suggest me Lucina's family visit. We should give her a small celebration when she next comes back here, Cora suggested, looking back up from her book again. Oh, no, Robert Crawley shook his head. I don't think that would be a good idea, given what happened at the servants' ball. She didn't know where to put herself. Anyway, she may not want to come back here after that. Cora Crawley leaned out of her seat, her eyebrows raised. You are her sponsor, Robert, she reminded him, and of course there is Mr. Barrow. Oh, yes, I forgot about Mr. Barrow, Robert Crawley replied, less enthusiastically. I suppose he knows about her success. Robert glanced to the door. I expect so. Carson says he gets a letter every 2 or 3 days from her, though he sends her somewhat fewer. I think it's a good idea, if Mama wishes to invite the Jamesons, Lady Crawley told her husband. After we get back from Scotland before the autumn season. I do, too, Lord Grantham told his wife. Then, he sat at his desk and began to read Professor Rutherford's letter again. 88,888,888. Miss Ashby's done well, Mr. Carson told the staff. Very well. Better than many people in better situations than her own. Course she did, exclaimed Daisy, smiling at the success of her friend. Milo had written, though Daisy had sent few letters back. She found writing difficult, but she tried because she liked to receive letters from her. They were amusing, sometimes talking about the Rutherford house and the food, sometimes about her colleagues and her work. Once, she had gone for a stroll in the park with two of her colleagues, but had not liked the ducks on the pond, but had liked the apple blossom. How do we know this girl? The new maid, Edna Braithwaite, looked over her teacup. Daisy frowned. She was no better than she should be, as Mr. Carson had told Mrs. Hughes, but they needed a maid and Lady Crawley had insisted she be employed because there were no other candidates. Her work was carried out at Downton, said Mrs. Hughes, carefully. Scientific work. That's not strictly true, Mr. Carson replied. It was her brother's work that was carried out here. Miss Ashby gained her place at university by presenting it, at an evening hosted by his lordship. And now she had got her degree, Mrs. Hughes added. A big achievement for a young woman in her circumstances with so many things going against her. Such as, Edna looked innocently over her cup. She finds social situations difficult, said Sarah O'Brien. Amongst other things, said Jimmy, grinning and looking around the table for support. And what do you mean by that? Asked Miss O'Brien, darkly. She even bit me once, when she was a little child, when she was scared. She doesn't understand people, but she understands more things than you ever will. She put down her cup, and gave him a scornful look. You just don't like her because she never gave in to your charms. Well, there's Mr. Barrow, Ivy put in. He had a hand in this somewhere. Didn't he? Helped her with things? By the way, he and she are together? Mrs. Hughes exchanged looks with Carson. Not that it's your business, Daisy piped up, glaring at Ivy, but he and Mr. Ashby, her brother, were friends. Jimmy gave Daisy a dark look, and another was on Mrs. Patmore's face. Don't you ever bring up, Jimmy began, a flash of anger in his voice. Daisy got to her feet. I were only sayin', she protested, waving her arms. I liked Mr. Ashby, he were ever so kind. And he made the electricity work in the house, and electrical things, even though Mrs. Patmore is scared of it all. Well, thank you very much. Mrs. Patmore leaned back in her chair, arms folded, glaring at Daisy. He were so clever, she sighed. That's all I meant. And he and Mr. Barrow? Edna Braithwaite had the measure of the subtleties, of the subtext, and it was amusing to pull at them. We're just friends, insisted Mr. Carson. And where's he gone now? Asked Edna. Never you mind, put in Miss O'Brien. She had seen how Edna had paid particular attention to her own job, where and what to do. She had ambitions. Well, Sarah O'Brien had them of her own, and that WSS not to be usurped. To see Milo, Daisy said. She's earned her degree. There's going to be a dinner for her. And how do you know that? Exclaimed Carson, offended at not knowing something first-hand. Because she writes to me, Daisy told him. But Jimmy, still irritated at the mention of both his name and Thomas Barrow's in the same sentence, turned to Daisy and scowled. A woman can't do that, he exclaimed. And why not? Asked Alfred. She's clever, ain't she? And because you want to go into a woman's business, you think a woman can go into a man's? Jimmy shot back, harshly. He folded his arms, knowing he was close to being over the mark, but he was annoyed. Not that it is any of your business, Mrs. Hughes reminded him. No, we know what your business was about, eh Jimmy? Provoked Alfred. Poor thing. I was right mad you got me mixed up in all of that. Jimmy knew full well, but he wanted to be provocative. Miss Ashby was a nice-looking thing but had been too much hard work. You know, the servants' ball, Alfred told him. When you wanted to go fast with her. Weren't right. Well said, said Daisy, and Alfred rewarded her with a rare smile. That is enough. Mr. Carson, half out of his seat, banged the table with a fist. The servants began to rise. Then he sat down. Jimmy looked away and said nothing else. He sounds like a dark horse, that Mr. Barrow. Edna smiled to herself. Getting amusement out of her new work colleagues was going to be easier than she had thought. If you haven't got anything sensible to say, Mr. Carson warned Edna Braithwaite, "Don't say anything at all." 888,888,888. The building seemed closed, and all locked up. No lights came from many of the windows, no sounds from any of the buildings. It was dark in Manchester, even though it was the summer. Late summer, he supposed, after the harvest, when nights suddenly seemed to draw in. Soon, it would be the end of summer fairs up and down the country, with farm wives selling wares and manufacturers of all sorts setting up shop to showcase what they did. He remembered going to several of them when he was younger with his father, before Henry was born, selling some of the older timepieces that were no longer in fashion. Poorer people bought them, for telling the time rather than aesthetics. He liked the fairs. Thomas had met him at the fair, Albert Lyon, with his father selling cider and ale, big barrels, smaller barrels. Abundant in quantity, Mr. Lyon had sold out just after midday. He and Albert had gone off to play, chasing one another around. When he heard his father calling, Thomas had thanked him for playing with him. Albert had given him a kiss on the lips. They had only been about 8 or 9, but he had remembered they both had. And when Mr. Lyon had moved into Salford, 3 streets away from Thomas's father's shop, it was like his world had turned from a dim Lowry painting into the bright uplands of the West End in London, complete with its neon lights. He had wondered about girls, of course he had. But Thomas had also been told not to play them, when he and Henry were out. Girls were not boys, they were different and operated under different rules. When Thomas had gone over to talk to one, who was standing outside the bakery down the street from Thomas's father's shop, she had taken one look at Thomas and run away. Another, Floy, who he had managed to speak to, he had played skipping and hopscotch with, but she had told him he couldn't play one day and had run off to 2 friends staring at them from underneath the steps at the back of the bakery. That had been Thomas's first introduction to social politics, and the hurt he had felt from Floy's rejection of him, not from something he had done but from what her friends had said, had made him a keen student, and then a master, and then a manipulator. Boys were straightforward: chase, run, hit, pretend to be in an army, nominate an enemy. Straightforward, but hard, and Thomas hated the hardness, the kicks, the punches, the fights, for he was invariably on the wrong side. He hated the disorganization of it all. Clocks had a high degree of organization, and Thomas liked that. Sensitive, his father had told him, when Thomas had come home cowering and cringing after a battle game. Too sensitive. Unlike his brother, who was younger, and was popular. Thomas could see it in Henry's face that he didn't want a gang of boys to chase his brother. But he never could stand up to his peers, who cajoled him and made him feel good. Henry fitted. Thomas was different. And, he liked Albert, who had, once he realized Thomas lived close by, sought him out, and they had gone beyond the fighting boys and off into marshland, where they could walk in peace, look at the little things crawling and living, just being on their own. Once, a boy had followed them, and stamped on a nest of dormice just to see Albert and Thomas get upset by it. It was one of the only times Thomas had initiated a fight, and the boy had run home. It had not come back to his father. As far as Thomas knew, no parent turned up on the Barrows' doorstep to confront him about the attack. But Thomas and Albert had learned to be more careful about where they went, and so, Thomas supposed, that was the start of him learning secrecy and subtlety, and that words, phrasings, had power. And that being nasty was a tough layer for would-be enemies to penetrate. Thomas tried again, knocking on the front door, where he had seen Milo, escorted by her colleagues almost a year ago, pass through. She had done so well. Yet, somehow, his heart felt sore, happy, but sore. Thomas has reasoned that it was that she was grown, and that she was grown made him remember Ernest. He turned away and began to stride towards the gates, but a call behind him made him stop. "If you are looking for the Rutherford party," a man called, "they aren't there." He was a small man, slight, and he was holding set of keys. "I've only just locked up. They have gone to the undergraduate hall." "Booked for a private engagement." "And where would that be?" Thomas Barrow asked. But the man was shaking his head. "Oh, no, you can't go there. He told him, "It's for the academics." Thomas glowered at him, and stepped forward just a touch to add a layer of menace. "And husbands?" The man, who seemed to be trembling, walked past Thomas and headed out to the road. "I'll show you," he stuttered quickly. They walked a little way down the darkened street, gas lamps fizzling in the warm evening air. "Here, sir," the caretaker said, and took him to the front doors of the hall, in which signs of life were emanating, the occasional laugh breaking over the low talking, clinking of cutlery and glasses and chinaware. Though it was a dinner, Thomas would hardly recognize it as such. As the caretaker closed the inner door behind him, Thomas looked for the same hierarchy, the same coherence as in Downton. Yet, there was none he could see. This was a dinner of academics, talking, laughing, getting on with the business of thinking. Words he could hardly understand mingled with the smoke from pipes and cigars and cigarettes, and in the middle of all the tweed suits, Milo. Thomas hardly recognized her, and it took a few moments for him to make her out. Dressed in a deep blue gown, ear-length hair curled at the nape, what made her almost unrecognizable was her affability, her ease of company. She looked so happy, so relaxed. It was the dark-haired handsome one who got to his feet first, having noticed Thomas standing the threshold. Patrick Blackett smiled to Thomas, and called, "Hello, who have we here?" "This is a man who knows about clocks," said Chadwick, smiling to Thomas, having just broken off his conversation with Cockcroft on the same topic. "How very apt to see you, Mr. Barrow." The horologist, John Cockcroft, half got to his feet. "You are very welcome, sir." But over all this, there was one person who was both shocked and delighted to see Thomas Barrow. There was muted laughter as Milo got up and rushed to him calling his name, along with raised eyebrows, muffled coughing. They were laughing with Milo, not because of her, so well they knew her by now. "I wrote to Thomas about Ashby's dinner, and so, well, my good fellow," Ernest Rutherford encouraged warmly as he got up and went to shake Thomas's hand. "I expect this is not the set-up you are used to at a house, Mr. Barrow. I do wish you to join us," he added, gesturing to his own chair next to Milo. "Mr. Haysham, will you fetch more port and some food? I bet this young man is hungry." "My thanks," Thomas said, nodding graciously to Rutherford, then sat beside his wife. Milo beamed, and he reached for her hand for a moment. "The important people in my life are here now," she whispered to Thomas. He ate, he drank. He discussed what he could with the academics around him. They put him at his ease, and Thomas Barrow found he was, within the context of the situation, enjoying himself. "When I speak of an atomic clock," Chadwick continued, sipping at his port, "I do not mean a mechanical device by which you record the passing of time, which is just an illusion, according to Einstein." Thomas had remembered that, long after the academics had left Downton, remembered it every time he had wound the Downton clocks. Rutherford had had a way of explaining things well enough for them to stick in Thomas's memory. "What I am talking about is decay, regular nuclear decay of atomic nuclei. Caused by what? We don't know yet. But we do know that the beta radiation is regular." Chadwick turned to Thomas, who found a hand on his shoulder. "May I speak to you, Mr. Barrow?" Rutherford, who had pulled up a chair next to Cockcroft, was now in his feet and had leaned down and whispered by his ear. "Of course," Thomas said, and pushed back his chair. "Gentlemen," he nodded. Milo. They crossed the parquet floor of the hall, mostly empty apart from the nucleus of academics at the center. The professor stopped nearer the wall, and offered Thomas a cigar, which he accepted. "This dinner tonight, which I am delighted you have attended," Rutherford began, as he offered a light for the cigar, "also celebrates my own work, in the splitting of the atom." "You have done it?" Thomas, who had only a vague idea of what that meant, smiled to Rutherford. "I understand practically nothing that Milo tells me," he told the New Zealander, "but I understand this is important, that there might be a source of energy, plentiful and low cost." Lloyd George's dream come true. Rutherford nodded, indulgently. "As her husband, I wish to speak to you, Mr. Barrow. I have offered Ashby a place, subject to your agreement, of course, with us down to Cambridge." Cambridge? That was significant. He could use that, well enough. His wife, when it was convenient for him to have a wife, was a lauded academic working with Nobel Prize winners. Appear to them all, an academic in her own right. She may go where she wishes, Professor, Thomas told him. May I ask, is your wife intending the move? May Milo live with you as she has done here? My dear fellow, Rutherford exclaimed, heartily, we would be delighted to host Ashby, that is, me Lucina. My wife adores her, and she is absolutely no trouble. May I thank you for her kindness in supplying her clothes? Thomas went in. It is not as if she cannot afford to buy some, it is more, the opportunity, and her will. Rutherford held up a hand. Say nothing more, my dear fellow, the professor exclaimed, clapping Thomas on the back. We are more than happy to accommodate your wife. Then, he looked past Thomas. He turned to see James Chadwick approaching them. Mr. Barrow, Chadwick said to him, we were in the middle of talking about clocks, and we felt it was your area of expertise. Come, Blackett wants to ask you something. Blackett? Now that sounded promising. He sat back down next to Milo, who took his hand again for a moment. Who wishes to know about clocks? Thomas asked, even though he knew. That will be me, Patrick Blackett, said the man, who held out a hand to Thomas. Thomas shook it, firmly. What is the best timepiece on the market, sir? He asked him. Make, model, country of manufacture, material, Switzerland, Thomas told him. Stainless steel spring. It is the coldness in temperature, I am given to understand, that makes it so accurate. So, well, Chadwick said, the peak of perfection in a timepiece manufactory, he said. Thomas nodded. And how does it work? So Thomas explained that a spring held the energy, which transferred the energy by a tiny governor inside the mechanism, which in turn was fed to other cogs set to turn the watch hands at different speeds depending on whether it was the minute or hour hand. The men listened intently to Thomas's discourse, and smiled and agreed as they smoked, Milo cocking her head to hear his words, though she was getting tired. What do I know of atoms, Mr. Barrow? Patrick Blackett asked. Very little, I am afraid. To put it simply, Chadwick here has proven that matter, to a greater or lesser degree, is transmutable, that is, it can be altered into other matter. Thomas turned to Ernest's friend. I do not understand, truly, Dr. Chadwick, Thomas said to him. How is this to do with clocks? What keeps a clock regular inside, I mean? Well, I don't know, it depends on the clock. The spring that allows the cogs to rotate. Precision in cutting those increases the accuracy of a timepiece. Is there not also an addition of gemstones on the inside? Chadwick asked. Sometimes. The rotation of these keep cogs regular. These are only on the most expensive timepieces, those in Switzerland, where it is cold. This makes the cogs to interplay with the gemstone while the temperature helps it work best. The men made murmurs of approval at Thomas's discourse, and he sat back, pleased. We will make a chemist of you yet, Mr. Barrow, Chadwick told him. Those crystals operate inside your timepiece to induce regularity to it. Indeed, it is the best there is at the moment, Thomas conceded. He took up the cigar again and gave several hearty puffs on it. Ah, mused Chadwick, then, comes back to the mutability of atoms. I have detected, or in the process of detecting, a particle within some atoms, chromium, for example, strontium, cesium, barium. These throw out that particle even more accurately than the timepiece. And the dial and the hands? Thomas asked, intrigued. Oh yes, I suppose those could be added, Chadwick added, indulgently. And would a wealthy gentleman such as Lord Grantham be able to wear this atomic clock? Thomas continued, amused by the thought. I would not recommend that at all, Chadwick told him, for we do not know yet the effects of this nuclear decay. A high degree of precision then, Thomas told him, but not a practical piece. Not yet, Chadwick laughed, not yet. Next to him, Rutherford put a hand on Milo's shoulder. She got to her feet and had her own audience with the professor. Dr. Chadwick, Milo speaks highly of you, very highly, Thomas told him. How is she, here? Working? Chadwick frowned a little. She is Ashby, he told him, so unlike her brother in so many ways, but with an insight born of her mind that is unique. I could not do without her, Mr. Barrow, truly I could not. I don't intend for that to happen, Thomas said, aware that the man might think that is where this conversation was leading. Let him, for a little longer. I am not here to take her away. James Chadwick lowered his port glass. Then what? You must have noticed that she has become a woman now. She is no longer a child. Indeed, Chadwick conceded. But it is not an issue in the slightest. Science is sex-free in that respect. I am very glad to hear it. Thomas smiled. Really what I mean to say, Mr. Barrow, Chadwick continued, all persons are treated on merit. Few other characteristics determine how we work. There are many female scientists working today. Madame Curie, as I am sure you know, and her daughter, Irene. Even Meitner, from the Kaiser Wilhelm Institute. Elise Meitner. He had heard Milo talk of her. He narrowed his eyes. The Kaiser Wilhelm Institute? Highly reputable, Chadwick assured him. The Kaiser is in exile, however this does not stop remarkable work that is being carried out there. As in Berlin, Thomas remembered aloud. Indeed, Chadwick agreed, picking up the port decanter and offering some to Thomas, who nodded, watching the dark red liquid splash into a cut crystal glass. We were threatened with conscription into the German army. Chadwick shuddered. Could you imagine anything worse than being forced to fight against your own countrymen? No, Thomas admitted. That must have been very hard for you. He cleared his throat. Dr. Chadwick, what I mean to say is, with Milo as she is, and growing into a not unattractive young woman. I can only keep her safe when she is with me. I do not wish for her to become an object of unwanted male attention. He glanced around at Manchester University's function hall. At celebrations such as tonight, in the future, at Cambridge, such as a dance, or a ball, where she might seem as if she is like any other woman, enjoying herself. She may not be. And I wish to keep her from men pressing their advantage. My dear fellow, Chadwick began, but Thomas continued. Not all men are as honorable as those here, Milo's colleagues, who I saw her working with her when I saw her off in September. He voted Jimmy, who had clearly wanted something of her. I married her as you know to afford her some measure of safety. This was not undertaken lightly on my part, he added. I do understand, Mr. Barrow. Chadwick reassured him. I was there, remember? For her sake, and for the memory of her brother, I will ensure she is cared for here. And she has Rutherford, who treats her as a daughter. May Rutherford who adores her. Then my mind is eased, Dr. Chadwick, Thomas said, inhaling deeply on his cigar. Now, to Manchester, or Cambridge should I send my design if I were to come up with a practical design for our atomic clock? Both men smiled. Lead would have to be part of it, James Chadwick told him, smiling. Other than that, anything comely and to the taste of a man such as Lord Grantham would do. We wish to make an announcement. Rutherford got the attention of his students now, standing beside Milo. And Rutherford told of their move, and Milo thanked them all for their support, including Thomas. And then Rutherford announced that their work in splitting the atom, the nitrogen atom, had won them a place back at Cambridge, with as much of his team as possible. You are to see me before the end of the month. After this, Milo was free from social obligations. Though she was tired, she and Thomas went for a walk by the Irwell, and he congratulated her again. I am so very pleased, so very proud of you, he told her, stopping and taking her hands. Oh, Thomas, Milo exclaimed. If only I could do for you what you have done for me. You do, he said. You carry Ernest with you, you do his work. But that isn't enough for you, Milo told him. The spirit of my brother? He will be with you, but what about your heart? Please, Milo said, if there is anyone at all who makes you happy, don't think about me, or think that you must withdraw if you do not want to. If he makes you happy, then I will be overjoyed for you. And Thomas drew her suddenly to him, kissing her for the first, but not the last time, hands supporting her back, gently but firmly pressing his lips to hers. But there was nothing there, not for him, not with a woman, not even with Milo. She was so lovely, never even considering his sinful thoughts, of men, different men. men he knew and men he had only ever glimpsed, on his mind, as he worked out if he could approach them discreetly. "If only," Thomas began, but Milo took his hands in hers again. "There is nothing," she said, "and we can't make it be so if there is not. Be free with your heart, Thomas, if you want to be, as you were with Ernest. You were so happy then. Will you try to do that? You are not spoiling his memory if you do it." "What would he say to you in this situation?" she implored. "What would you say to him if he was in your shoes?" And Thomas was crying as they turned to walk back to the university, uninhibited, emotional tears, as he reached back into his memory and thought of all of those times that, rather than speed time up, Ernest slowed it down to a trickle, and it was just them, in their own world, together. "Milo, thank you for being my friend," Thomas told her as they walked her back to the Rutherfords' home, before giving her one last embrace before walking back down the street and onto the station.